Yeah. I'm a career prosecutor. I went to the Justice Department in 1990 and did a wide variety of criminal cases. Spent about a decade as an appellate lawyer. I ran our appellate division. And then I was appointed during the Obama administration. I was the political person after being a career person for so long. And something that changed in that job, which had responsibility not just for individual cases, but for thinking holistically. How do we prevent crime? How do we prosecute crime? How do we help people who've been to prison avoid recidivism? So that whole three-legged stool that required balance, you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that prosecution alone could not solve the crime problem. And public health was a logical partner. And I had the great good fortune of going through Leadership Birmingham early in my tenure as a U.S. attorney. And one of my classmates was the guy who ran public health for the county. And we were in a small work group together, saw a lot of overlap, ended up doing a program that was essentially for young moms who were low income, who didn't have good access to information, and building apps that they could use, an app in connection with a Birmingham, just a really talented, young, very, very mobile company. And so building public health information into their information ecosphere. And so I'll just tell you what led me to believe that public health and law enforcement were partners. It's a difficult story. It's maybe a trigger warning story for people who have loved ones who are addicts. One of my oldest sons, I've got 4 kids, the first year that he was in college, one of his friends overdosed and died on heroin. She was at home in Shelby County when that happened. And the week after her funeral, I happened to be at a meeting with the sheriff in Shelby County, Chris Curry. And I said, "Oh, Chris, did you hear about this young woman? It's such a tragedy." And I said something like, she's been at school in London. She must have gotten addicted there. And he turned and he looked at me and he said, "Joyce, she didn't get addicted in London. I know who sold her the heroin that killed her. It's somebody in Shelby County." And I had done one heroin prosecution as a young prosecutor, probably 15 years earlier. I would have sworn we did not have a heroin problem. And I said, "Chris, is that isolated?" And he said, "No, I have a problem." And ultimately we sat down with sheriffs and police chiefs from Jefferson, Shelby, and Tuscaloosa counties. I went around the room and I asked each of them that question: "Do you have a heroin problem?" And they would say, "Well, I've got this one apartment building that's eaten up with it, but that's it." Or, "I've got this one corner." By the time we got around the room, they just said, "Wow, we have a bad problem that we didn't recognize." And my very, very conservative, pro-prosecution criminal chief at the time had this wonderful epiphany that we could not arrest our way out of that problem. So we created a community engaged initiative. We did prosecutions. We prosecuted the hell out of every major seller we could get our hands on. We took them off the streets to give the public health initiative time to work. And our primary goal was to really destigmatize addiction and recovery. We worked with some great folks, did public service announcements that I vetted extensively with the high school kids. And then with younger kids in my neighborhood, I swooped them all up on a rainy afternoon and said, "Watch these and tell me which ones work and which ones are stupid." And we ended up with some really great public health spots, award-winning spots that I was proud of. We saw in that community engaged public health/law enforcement initiative progress we could have not made with prosecution alone. So I'm sorry for the long story. It's just to say, I believe that that's true for gun violence, for a lot of other areas. We need to get out of our silos and learn to work together.
100%. And what you just described is a beautiful example of healthcare design and human-centered design. Bring stakeholders to the table, iterate, discuss, bring perspective, different industries, but all centered on diagnosing the issue, solving the problem, coming up with solutions. And it may not be the perfect solution, but it's been iterated and brainstormed such that what the end product is better than had you not done that exercise. And we know diverse teams are productive teams with better outcomes. And this is just a beautiful, beautiful example.